Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Bible study. And we are studying the Torah portion that is called Toldot, and that means histories. It can also mean generations or descendants. And it's Genesis 25 to Genesis 28. And the Haftorah portion and the New Testament portion is in Malachi and Matthew. Unfortunately, don't have time to touch on that this week. Hopefully, we can get to some Torah portions a bit later on where we can do something out of the Haftorah portion and the New Testament scriptures. But this is sort of what this week's portions look like. Chapter 25 deals with the generations of Abraham, and then the birth of Esau and Jacob. And that's where we are going to spend most of our time for this week's study. Chapter 26 deals with the birth, right, being sold from Esau to Jacob. Then chapter 27 is where Esau feels that Jacob steals his blessing, but it's actually rightfully Jacob's. Because Esau sold his birthright, you cannot separate the birthright from the blessing. And so Jacob actually didn't steal it at all, but that was Esau's perspective on the matter. And then chapter 28, we don't really go long into chapter 28, but it's the sending of Jacob, where his father sends him to his uncle Laban's house. And that story continues into next week's Torah portion. So let's look. We are in Genesis 25. Most of the scriptures we have for this week's portion will be in Genesis 25. I think there might be one or two from Genesis 38. So this is Genesis 25 verses 21. So Yitzhak, that is Isaac, prayed to Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was childless. Adonai heard his prayer, and Rebecca became pregnant. So I just wanted to pause here and just if there are any men listening, please pray for your wives. What a blessing to be able to pray for your wife and to intercede on her behalf. Take up that mantle of being the priest and the prophet of the house, and pray for your wives. And Adonai heard his voice and answered his prayer. And so we're moving on to where she then becomes pregnant. And so the children fought with each other inside her so much that she said, if it's going to be like this, why go on living? So she went to inquire. And I think this is amazing. She went to inquire from God. And how often do we feel we are in a position in our lives where we just feel like, I don't even know what to do? And do we then turn to people or turn to our little comforts as human beings? Or do we turn to God? Because if we turn to God, he will give you an answer. It might not be immediately, but he will give you an answer. But Adonai answered and said to her, there are two nations in your womb. From birth, they will be two rival peoples. One of these people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And so here we already see, this is the punchline, right? It's like telling a joke and someone tells you the punchline before it actually happens. So she was given the punchline in advance so that there can be peace in the house and the peace in her heart, knowing that God is in what is going to happen. Okay, so let's pick up the story of Jacob and Esau. And the story of Jacob and Esau starts at birth, and we're going to look at some characteristic traits later on from when they were born and how they grew into different types of human beings, and even the descriptions of what they found interesting or what people looked from the outside to say, well, this is how this person is and this is how this person is. It's really complete opposites for Jacob and Esau. But the story really actually starts to get quite interesting. And that punchline that was given to Rebecca in advance starts with Jacob making a pot of red lentils and Esau coming in from the field, because he was characterized as a man of the field. He came in from the field, and then he asked his brother, please give me some of that red. He asks for that red. And in English it sounds weird, but that's how it's said in Hebrew, and we're going to look at those words a bit later. But give me some of that red. And then Jacob says to Esau, sell me your birthright. And Esau says, well, if you don't give me some food now, I am definitely going to die. So by all means, take the birthright. Now, as a westernized society, we don't really understand what's actually going on here. So for those of you who haven't heard this story before, this is for you. So it is a tradition for the eldest grandson to make the food at the grandfather's funeral. And so what the sages say, and the story, the folk tale that was handed over from generation to generation, was actually that Abraham died and Esau was called in from the field for his grandfather's funeral. And also he knew he would be tasked with making the food for the funeral. And he actually didn't come immediately. And so what Jacob did is he wanted to honor his grandfather Abraham. And so he made the food. So when Esau showed up, he had already neglected his birthright by not making the food at this funeral. Now, if it's true or not, we don't know, but it does make a lot of sense as to why Jacob, I mean, I'm sure there were other times in his life where Esau wanted some food and Jacob could have sold him the food for the birthright. Why specifically this situation? Why now? Why then? And we think it might be because he had neglected his birthright as the eldest grandson to make the food at Abraham's funeral. So this is where we pick up the story of Jacob and Esau, and we want to look at how Jacob and Esau represents all of us as human beings. And so we're going to look at the following, and I'm so sorry if you do hear the rain. It is raining here by me. I hope it doesn't bother you too much, but Esau represents the physical being. The reason for that is he is described as a cunning man, and he is described as a man of the field. And the field always means the physical, the tangible, the things you can touch. And it also, that word cunning is the same word that was used to describe the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And we knew that Eve lusted after her flesh, and the cunning serpent used that physical side of her to sort of set the trap. But Jacob, on the other hand, let me just check. Jacob represents the spiritual man. And the reason for that is Jacob is described as a man of tents. He was a tent dweller and a humble man. And we know that in tents is where people studied the word of God, and that's highly spiritual. The next thing is he was called a man of the field, and Jacob was a man of the tents. The next one is Esau was known for his appetites. We see that both Jacob and Esau's names are changed in their lifetime. Now, Esau's name is changed in this week's portion, and Jacob's will be changed within the next 2 Torah portions, more or less. So Esau's name is after he sells his birthright for the red lentils. He's called Edom, which means red, and we'll look at that a bit later. But so we see that he's known and he's called for his appetite. And it's interesting that he's named after something that he eats, because earlier in this portion, it's described that Isaac loved Esau for game was in his mouth, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And we see there were no conditions to loving Jacob, but to loving Esau and knowing Esau, there's an appetite, a physical, tangible appetite connected to it. And so we see that his name is changed to Edom. Whereas Jacob, on the other hand, was known for his blessing. He was known as a righteous person. He was known as a good guy. And we see later that his name is then changed to Israel. That happens later on. And that is where we actually get the country of Israel's name from. It's the people of Jacob. It's Jacob's descendants. And the next thing is that in the end, Esau serves his brother. He becomes the servant. And Jacob becomes the head of the house, and he's no longer the second born, but in the eyes of God, he is the firstborn. And then we also see that Esau sold his birthright, which means that he had little respect for his birthright. Whereas Jacob really respected his birthright. He really had respect for his birthright and respect for what God gave to his brother, and his brother squandered it. Okay, whenever we have a menorah pattern like this, we always try to find the central point. And the central point, what it points to here for me, and you might find something else, but it points to mankind. Every single one of us will have an Esau and a Jacob inside of us. We have this dual nature. C.S. Lewis calls us amphibians because we have this duality. We have this physical side. We have a physical body, and we do need to eat, so we do have appetites. We live on this earth, so we are also people of the field. And often, if you look at people, we are known for our appetites. If your appetite is to have a nice car and a nice house, that's what people will talk about. If your appetite is promiscuities, that's what people will talk about. And you often, in modern day, we call it being labeled. You get labeled by your appetites, and so we need to get to a place of Jacob, because we all also have a spirit, and we are supposed to be dwelling in tents, and we're supposed to be known for our blessings, and we are supposed to conform to Israel, to be part of Israel, to be so one with Israel that we are called part of Israel. And God says that one of his blessings in Deuteronomy is that you will be the head and not the tail. But the last thing is we need to respect our birthright. And so we see that as we progress in our lives, we need to get the balance right between our Esau and our Jacob. And we're going to look at how do we do that. So all of us have both nations growing inside of us. The one cannot survive without the other. Your spirit doesn't stay here on earth when your body dies. But a live body cannot live without a spirit. And so we see the one cannot survive without the other. But, sorry, that needs to be a but, the one must serve the other. Okay, so all of us have both a Jacob and an Esau inside of us. All of us have a physical being and a spiritual being, and all of us need to subdue our physical nature under our spiritual nature. And often we don't realize that we love to blame the enemy. We love to blame the plans of Satan and the enemy interfering, and he definitely does that. But 90% of the time, he uses your own physical nature against you. He uses your own physical desires and appetites as your pitfalls to give him legal right to attack you. And so our biggest enemy is not the enemy, but it's our own fleshly needs that we need to control. And the enemy will use your own nature to keep you away from God. Okay, so I want to look at this word Edom. I want us to see how it actually, it has 4 different types of mentions and ways that it is used. So the first one is Strong's 122, and this is used in this week's Torah portion. This is, however, not the root word. You can see here it says from 119. That means that is the root word for this word Edom that we see here, or Adom. Okay, and it basically means red, rosy, ruby, red. And we see it used here. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And so we see that same is 122. And we see red is 122. And that's where we get in Hebrew, give me some of that red. For I am faint. Therefore his name was called red. Okay, so let's look at some other uses of this word. Also Edom, this is 123. So if you look back here, sorry, The red that was used to describe the porridge is 1 to 2, Adom, but they called him Edom. Edom is 1 to 3. That's our next example. 1, 2, 3. And this means red, the elder twin brother of Jacob. So henceforth, Esau was known as Edom. And it was also a region occupied by his descendants, Edom. This 1, 2, 3 that is used. And another example is the root word, which is 119, and that's Adam. Doesn't that sound familiar? Okay, this means to show blood, even in the face, or flush, or to turn rosy. Also means red. And another way that it's used is 120, and that's Adam as well. And this is the man Adam and Eve. And so we see that Esau, in his name, how he is named as Edom, and his appetites points us back to the first Adam. It points us back to the first man that lived, the first physical human being that lived, who was unfortunately also deceived and known for what he and Eve ate. And it followed them their whole lives, and by default also us. And so we see even in the naming of Esau to Edom, it points us to the physical nature. It points us to mankind. And it also means to be made from the dust of the earth. And that's what Esau was also known for. He was known for a man of the field. So, I mean, there's no such thing as coincidence, right? So 1 to 1 is also the name of Adam. Okay, so the first 120 is more mankind, Adam, and 121 is the physical name of Adam. Okay. So I want us to look at the story of Tamar that you find in Genesis 38. And the reason we are doing this is we see only 2 twins being born in the Bible. The first pair is born to Rebekah and Isaac, and we have the story of Jacob and Esau. The second twin pair that is born is the children of Tamar. Now, Tamar was the daughter-in-law of Judah, one of Jacob's sons, his 4th son to be exact. And Tamar married Judah's eldest son, but he was a wicked man, and so God killed him. And in Hebrew culture, if a brother dies without raising a child in his name to take care of the women in the family, the next brother then marries that person to raise up a name for his brother. And so Tamar's second husband was Judah's second son, and he was also a wicked man, and so God also killed him. And by this stage, you know, Judah sort of thought Tamar's hard on sons. And so his youngest son wasn't of age yet, but he told her to wait until he comes of age, and he will then give the youngest son to her. Needless to say, Judah didn't do that, and Tamar heard that the son had come to age, but she had not received a husband, and so she did something strange. She dressed up as a prostitute, and she had relations with Jacob. I keep saying Jacob, I'm so sorry, with Judah. She has relations with Judah and becomes pregnant, and people and he says he has nothing to pay, and she takes his signet ring and his staff and says, send me payment and I'll give this back to you. And so word reaches Judah's ears that Tamar is pregnant, and he's on his way to have her stoned. And she says, well, I'm pregnant by the person whose signet ring and staff this is. And Judah must have looked at it and realized, oh goodness, I'm the father. Needless to say, they never had relations again, but she did give birth to twins. And so that's why we want to pick up the story, because when we see only 2 people in the Bible having twins, that is described for us as such, God is completing a menorah pattern for us, and it's our job to put these back together. So that's what we're going to do. So this is This is the story still of Jacob and Esau, and this is the birth of Esau. The first to come out was reddish. Okay, so even at his birth, he was called red already and covered all over with hair like a coat. So they named him Esau or Esau, that's the Hebrew, completely formed, that is having hair already. This is the story of, oh, sorry, I think I have that one twice, sorry. This is from Genesis 38, verses 28. This is Tamar going into labor. As she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a scarlet thread on it, saying, "This one came out first." But then he withdrew his hand, and his brother came out. So she said, "How did you manage to break out first?" Therefore he was named Peretz, breaking out. Then out came his brother with the scarlet thread on his hand, and he was given the name Zerach, scarlet. And so we are looking at these twins of Rebekah and Tamar. So Rebekah's firstborn child was marked by red. He was called reddish because he was covered in red hair and he was red. Later on, he's also called Edom after his red that he traded his birthright for. And the firstborn of Tamar was also marked by red. Remember, a red scarlet thread was placed around the firstborn's wrist. When Jacob went to get his rightful blessing, it was his blessing because he had the birthright. He did lie to his father. And we see that Tamar also lied to, I'm sorry, this one's not coming up correctly. Tamar also lied to the father of her children. She dressed up as a prostitute and lied to Judah, and that's how she became pregnant. The firstborn right was passed on from Esau to Jacob. And the firstborn right was sort of passed on in Tamar's story as well, because the one put out his hand, but the other one came out first. Okay. We see that Jacob dresses up like his brother, but Tamar dresses up like a prostitute. We see that the oldest, Esau, will serve the younger, Jacob. And we see that in Tamar's twins that the secondborn triumphs in birth over the firstborn. And then the last one we see, this represents us and Messiah. Okay, so I want us to keep all of this in mind. So if you think, for example, that we are born human beings, we are known by red, but so also is our Messiah by the blood of Messiah. The lying to the father, I have absolutely no idea to tie to Messiah, but that was just something interesting I really wanted to put in. The firstborn right was passed on. And if we think how we as human beings, we lost our firstborn right in the Garden of Eden. It was lost, but it was passed on to the secondborn people, the reborn people through Messiah. We are born again. And so that blessing, that firstborn right was passed on through Abraham all the way to Messiah, to us. We see that Jacob dresses up like his brother. We as human beings, our spiritual nature should be the strongest. But in order for the spirit to shine through, Jacob, the spirit, needs to dress up in a flesh. And so we dress up in a flesh every day. The spirit is dressed up as Esau, as this fleshly thing. And so even though we cannot see Jacob, God can. Okay? And we dressed up in this fleshly coat that looks like us, but actually our essence is a spirit. We see that Tamar dressed up like a prostitute. She looked like someone that was actually not welcome. And that's how Messiah looked to his own people, to the people of Israel. They were very confused. It wasn't someone that was welcomed everywhere. And so he came for a lost bride. The older will serve the younger. The moment we take on Messiah, we see a flipping in our nature. That physical nature no longer triumphs. That physical nature no longer controls us. The spirit, the second-born, starts ruling over the firstborn. And so also will happen with Messiah. His second coming will be his triumph. His first coming, he was covered in scarlet, but his second coming, he will triumph over everything. And so this is the story of us and Messiah, and the road of us and Messiah coming together, forming, and then my center branch of the menorah will be the bride and the groom. So Messiah has two comings. The first one, he was marked by a scarlet thread, but the second coming, he will triumph. Jacob and Esau represents his bride, physical and spiritual in nature, and the one must be tamed under the other. So how do we do this? This is my question, right? It's all good and well understanding this, but how do you tame your physical nature under your spiritual nature? How do we tame Esau, a cunning man, a hunter of the field? And we see that cunning man coming again from the Garden of Eden. Well, the same way Jacob did, of course, we need to do what Jacob did in order to tame Esau, in order to make Esau the servant of Jacob. So let's look first. If you want to tame something, right, you need to know what it is. Without honesty of what it is, how can you even start forming a game plan of taming it? So Esau is described as cunning, a man of the field. Give me food or I would drive, very dramatic, giving into his physical nature, giving into how he's feeling. And so we see he's driven by his emotions. Loved because he gave people food. So his love was conditional. Named after his appetites. So whatever he liked, that's what people knew him as. He was a resentful man. He resented Jacob to the extent that he became vengeful. He wanted to kill his brother. And he was also spiteful, we will see later on, because he marries someone that his parents really don't approve of. And he only wanted the blessing, but none of the responsibility. So we see he was quite happy to sell the birthright, which carries the responsibility. But when it came to the blessing, he said, give, give, give. So, sorry, I want to go back. We often do this. We love the scriptures in the Bible, that's the blessing. We love the scriptures in the Bible that says, God will, my favorite one is, for I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope in the future. Do you know what the preconditions are to that scripture? We also love to quote Psalms 1 of the tree planted by rivers of water, that whose leaves does not wither and who gives fruit in its season, right? But do we know that it speaks of keeping the law of God strictly? That's the prerequisite to be this tree. And so often we want the blessing, but we don't want the responsibility of the firstborn right and doing the day-to-day activities that give us the right to the blessing. Whereas Jacob, on the other hand, was he spent his time in tents. And in tents is where we see where people go into intimacy with God. He appreciates his birthright and did not only want the blessing, he wanted the right first. And when the time was right for him to receive the blessing, he went and got it. Jacob means heel. And we see here that sometimes our spirit needs to trip up the heel of the flesh. It needs to slow us down. Our conscience needs to say, what are you doing? Don't do that. Think. That's not what the word of God says. That is the Spirit's job. He was a righteous man. He went into covenant with God. Humility towards others. He never saw himself as better. He blessed others. and he was part of Israel. He became the first person known as Israel. And Jacob was a plain man who made a covenant with God. In his place, he wasn't this guy, this man of this field, the big guy, the guy who got all the hunting done and brought everyone food. And, he was a plain man, just like his grandfather Abraham. And he also was able to make a covenant with God. And so if you look deeper into the story, you can find yourself ways to tame your physical nature, prophecy of the Messiah's coming, the first one and the second one, and also a story of each of us and the daily cross we carry to lay down our own lives for him. This is what Yeshua meant when he said, take up your cross and follow me. He meant you must subdue your physical needs, your physical appetites, if you want to follow me. It's a spiritual walk, a walk like Jacob's walk. And so let's recap. We are a Jacob and we have an Esau. It's very important. The one serves the other. We are known for our appetites, or are we known and renamed after God's people? What are you known as? Okay, and then do we just want the blessing, or are we in the tent no matter what? I hope that you have a lovely Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. See you next week. Please feel free to leave a comment. If you like this video, click the like button. Remember to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to ring the bell.